So I just saw Captain America Brave New World, and bleh! Shout out to my dad for going to see this with me. We used to go all the time growing up, and this was the first movie we've gone together in probably a year or so. I always cherish the times we can do that together. Wish the movie was better, but that's what we're here to discuss today. The story picks up where Falcon and Winter Soldier left off, with Sam Wilson now donning the Captain America suit. He's brought in for a meeting with now President Thaddeus Ross to discuss reassembling the Avengers. It goes sour, though, after an assassination attempt is made against the president by Isaiah Bradley. It's now up to Sam and the new Falcon, Joaquin Torres, to investigate the case, which leads them down a rabbit hole in which a giant global conspiracy is unearthed. So this movie reportedly had a really rough production leading up to its release. It was reported that extensive reshoots were done to fix the movie following poor test screenings. This is always a great sign that your movie is going to be just wonderful. In all seriousness, I did want to keep an open mind. I really like the Captain America movies. I rewatched all three of them, and I can still confirm that they hold up to this day. I like Sam Wilson, I think he's a cool character, and he works great off Steve Rogers. I was excited at the prospect of Sam Wilson taking on the mantle of Captain America, and was curious to see what that journey would be like for him. And although there are some attempts to explore the personal struggles that come with continuing Cap's legacy, it's not really the main focus of this movie. Instead, we have a million other subplots going on that, while are interesting, don't really jive into a cohesive narrative. I would say this movie is more of a sequel to The Incredible Hulk, which I saw once a few years ago and completely forgot about. I guess Tim Blake Nelson as the leader was in that movie, but I don't really remember him or his character. His presence here was okay, but again, his arc is bogged down by everything else this movie wants to do that it's hard to care about it. I guess for some positives, some of the action scenes are cool. The Red Hulk scene in particular stood out to me. I would say his character doesn't have nearly as much screen time as the marketing would have you believe, but I did enjoy the scenes he had in his film. I like the attempts at character building, but I wish they were explored in ways that wasn't them just directly stating their motivations to us. This is something I talked about in my Wolfman review, but I really hate when a movie uses expository dialogue to dive into a character's psyche. Subtle gestures and actions characters make can communicate a lot to the audience, and the movie is just missing that subtlety. CGI, I would say, is hit and miss. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it looks a little clunky. Same thing for the editing and cinematography. Sometimes it looks fine, other times it doesn't. Regardless, it doesn't have the same swagger that Winter Soldier or Civil War did. Hell, even First Avenger had more style to their action scenes. This again was just kinda bleh. I can't help it, guys, let's just get into negatives. As I've already alluded to, the biggest problem this movie faces is that it's completely incoherent narratively. Although I appreciate the attempts at continuing different storylines that we thought we'd never hear about again, particularly how they get back to that giant structure that erupted out of the Indian Ocean in Eternals, but I also get the impression that this movie is just doing things because they think the audience will want to see it. I think the biggest challenge Marvel faces right now is figuring out how to adequately build upon storylines that they set up in previous movies. There's an impression I get that they're just kind of winging this whole cinematic universe as they go along, which is understandable. It's already a miracle that these movies did go together for as long as they did. But now that they've reached Avengers Endgame, where do you go from here? You can either develop a new story and stay strictly committed to it, or you can just do standalone stories that take place in this greater universe. Ultimately, it appears as if they opted for a 50-50 route where some stories come together and others don't. Regardless, it's undeniable that much of the energy and gravitas that the previous MCU movies had just isn't present here. As for the performances, they're honestly not great. I really like Sam Wilson and Anthony Mackie's portrayal of him, but he just doesn't have the same charisma that Steve Rogers did. It feels like he's trying to do an imitation of a tough guy, and I just never really bought it. It also didn't help that a lot of the dialogue he's given is really awful. He does his best with it, but a good performance can only take this material so far. Now, it's possible this is just because the director is simply not experienced enough to take on this project. His biggest claim to fame preceding this film was the Cloverfield Paradox, which was quite bad, so maybe the blame should be shifted onto him. I also didn't like Joaquin Torres and found him very annoying. And then there's Sabra. Okay, let's talk about this. Music off, please. I'll be careful with this because I understand this is a delicate subject and I want to make sure my points are coming across crystal clear. If you don't know about this, Sabra is an Israeli superhero who has had a controversial past in previous Marvel comics. Much criticism has been generated around her portrayal and her lack of empathy towards Arabs in peril. This is especially significant given Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza and how Palestinians continue to be dehumanized by American politicians and the media. It resulted in calls to boycott the film and even protests outside the premiere at the TCL Chinese Theater. Here's my take on it. First of all, the character sucks. It's not because she's Israeli, it's because her performance is bad. She was a boring, lifeless character with no personality or intrigue to her. In regards to how she's portrayed in this film, although there are no Zionist talking points or actions that are depicted in this film, she is still identified as an Israeli former Black Widow, this being different from her comics origin of being a former Mossad agent. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not worth it to boycott this film, or that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is wasting their time on this, because truth be told, it's important to call out the reality of the situation and how it is portrayed in entertainment. Israel is operating in an apartheid state, they are guilty of genocide, the settlements of the West Bank are in fact illegal under international law, and Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal with an arrest warrant issued by the ICC. Additionally, Donald Trump is calling for an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by suggesting that the US will occupy Gaza, take it over, and seemingly rebuild it. This is not exclusive to Donald Trump, as this has always been US policy. He's just saying it out loud because he feels more emboldened to do so. The only reason this subject is controversial, or why this is a quote-unquote complicated subject for many, is because criticism around Israel, their existence, and their actions is labeled as anti-Semitic. It's important to recognize that this false equivalency that continues to be pushed is exactly why these atrocities continue in the first place. People are traumatized by the horrors of the Holocaust, and in doing so believe that the only true way to atone for their sins is to support the state. But let me be crystal clear that reconciliation for one group's trauma doesn't justify inflicting another group's trauma. This false equivalency that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic is dangerous because it ultimately will lead to more anti-Semitism when you consider the actions that the state is taking against an entire group of people. People don't like to see a genocide unfold on their TVs, and insisting that it needs to be done in order to protect a population will ultimately lead uneducated minds to turn against them. Any pressure that we can make as a collective to let companies, and frankly the world, know that we find these actions unacceptable must be taken. It is important that we continue to speak on it, and I understand the fear that many face when speaking out against these atrocities due to how they may be perceived, but let it be known it is the bravest thing an individual can do. We talk about how we would respond if we lived during the Holocaust or during Jim Crow, and we assume that we would be on the right side of history and speak out. But speaking out against these matters had dire consequences then, which is why we commend the bravery of those who did so to this day. So let it be known that those who have the courage to speak out against this are to be commended and are brave themselves. As for how all this pertains to this movie, the reality is the character Sabra doesn't need to be here, and her presence really doesn't add much to this movie. Although simply boycotting this movie wouldn't be the end-all be-all when it comes to speaking out against the atrocities of Israel in the United States, it is noteworthy. So I guess my answer as to whether you should boycott this movie is this. Sabra doesn't spout any Zionist rhetoric or encourage any violence against any group of people, but boycotting this movie for this reason is a valid one. And if you feel compelled to do so, then you should. I'm sorry if this is kind of a bullshit middle-of-the-road answer, but that's how I feel. I don't think you are directly supporting Zionism by supporting this film, but being vocal about your boycott is a little step to making a big change. Take that as you will. It saddens me that this movie turned out the way it did. I really liked the premise this is presenting and thought it was a good pitch from the get-go, but it's clear that there's too many strings being pulled for it to work all together. The writing is messy, the action scenes are a mixed bag, the characters are dull and lifeless, and at the end of the day, this is simply not Marvel operating in their prime. They can do so much better than this, and I've seen it from them before. Many talk about the quote-unquote comeback of Marvel and what that would look like, but I truthfully don't think they will ever be able to achieve that greatness again. Interests evolve and change, and Marvel may never be able to make the comeback that they maybe hope they can. Although we can only hope that Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four First Steps will be big wins for them, they'll need to do something fresh and new that reflects the cultural zeitgeist if they ever wish to be a part of it again. And to do so would require incredible creative risks. I think that's been the biggest problem with Marvel movies up until this point. They never really had the guts to try new things or go new places. Sure, they've attempted new characters that would go on to not work out for them, like Kang, for various reasons, of course, but a new character doesn't signify creative evolution. A type of risks I want to see would be reflected in the creative presentation or its storytelling, and Marvel has yet to do anything that resembles this. Fantastic Four could be an attempt. I like the pulpy Tomorrowland look that they're going for, and the occasional use of the 4:3 aspect ratio. I also like Matt Shakman and think he's a very accomplished director, so maybe there'll be something there. I don't think bringing back Robert Downey Jr. to play Doctor Doom is how you save this franchise. I'll always hold a soft spot for the MCU, and will always be curious to see what they're up to, but I can't say I have much faith in them as a brand at this time. I think this is another unfortunate roadblock in their trajectory, and it's hard to see how they'll come out of this. As for my rating, it's a 4 out of 10. Just a really bland, lifeless movie that doesn't justify its existence in any way. And that's all I've got. This is a little bit more of a beefy video than I was expecting, so I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hope you're all doing okay out there, and until next time.